New Public Management, or NPM. That is going to be the theme of my presentation today. The purpose of my presentation is to acquaint you guys with the concept of NPM by examining the rationale behind its emergence, defining it, and also providing some examples. However, before moving on, I want to just point out that I am a critic of NPM, and you will notice this in the latter half of my presentation. So what is New Public Management? There's a lot of ways of looking at this concept, and I believe the most straightforward way of understanding it is to understand it in terms of it being as an operational framework. Prior to the introduction of NPM, which was approximately in the late 1970s or early 1980s, there was a generalized view of the public sector being broken, inefficient, and ineffective in its delivery of public goods and services. There was also a lot of controversies around the red tape being prominent in the public sector. So NPM was ideally a framework or a set of tools that sought to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and economy of the public sector. And the way it sought to do this was by implementing private sector values, because NPM says that in order for something to work at its best, it must operate in terms of a business. So it ideally placed emphasis on the private sector values being as the most important out of everything else. The reason for NPM's adoption or introduction or creation was that neoliberalism and capitalism exerted demands on the public sector, and those changes caused the social, economic, political, and technology to change, which in turn demanded the public sector to work in a new way. So NPM was essentially a response to the failures of the public sector. Before moving on to explaining the details of NPM, it is important to note that NPM isn't just one policy or one instrument. There are many components of it, and the best way to look at it is to see NPM as a menu from which choices can be made. There are 5 primary components of NPM. First, it is the importance to reform the operational framework of the public sector to one that is more business-like. This would include, for example, the allowance of private investors in public workings, the commodification of all goods and services, the delivery of services and goods from a customer's perspective, and also implementing private sector tactics such as downsizing and privatization. Second, NPM argues for the organization of the public sector to be restructured. This, for example, would be decentralizing the hierarchical communication of the public sector, which was seen to be inefficient. Third, NPM argues for a strict evaluation system to guide the work in the public sector. Thus, this would mean continuous monitoring of employees and measuring their performance according to predetermined indicators and benchmarks. Fourth, it is the emphasis on the importance of managers in the public sector. NPM asserts that managers typically have more expertise and should guide the employees under them, and that would increase the outcomes and results of their work. Lastly, NPM emphasizes the importance of an entrepreneurial attitude in the public sector. This was seen to improve the dedication and focus of workers in the public sector. As I mentioned earlier, there is no one definite term that encompasses how NPM is structured to work. Instead, there are many choices, policies, and instruments that can be categorized under NPM. These would include, for example, privatization, deregulation, contracting out, decentralization, and downsizing. Additionally, there are also many other items or terms that are synonymous for NPM. This would include, for example, public-private partnerships or managerialism. I like to think of NPM as any behavior, policy, or instrument that has a private sector character to it, and that ideally is what NPM is. It is the implementation of business-like values into the public sector. New public management sounds like a great proposal on paper. It is ideally saying that we can make the public sector work better in all dynamics, ranging from the effectiveness of its services to improving the efficiency of organizational behavior if we implement certain business-like values or private sector prospects. NPM also argues that the implementation of these strategies will pose no harm to the public sector whatsoever. However, the problem with NPM is that in reality, imposing a strict framework on the public sector can result in some serious complications which may actually exacerbate the problems of the public sector NPM originally intended to fix. Here's why. The first part of NPM is to restructure the environment of the public sector to one that is more business-like. The problem with that is that the public sector inherently holds its own set of values, and the incorporation of public sector values will only serve to undermine those original public sector values. For instance, instead of emphasizing on profit-making like the private sector does, the public sector directs its efforts in its delivery of goods and services to benefit the general public, regardless of one's ability to pay. Therefore, the obligation claimed by NPM to attach a value on all goods and services in the public sector would essentially flaw the public sector's true purpose. And that just doesn't seem right. Although it may increase efficiency and effectiveness, it is not what the public sector was originated to do. Moreover, problems arise if we investigate into other components of NPM. For instance, with NPM's claim regarding the need for stakeholders that invest into public sector projects, the problem with this is that decision-making in the public sector would now be more influenced by stakeholders as opposed to being influenced by the people, who are essentially supposed to be the most important players in the public sector. NPM also emphasizes the need to restructure the internal organization of the public sector in order to increase the way work is done. This would ideally increase efficiency regarding aspects such as communication and decision-making. This is typically done through decentralization, as argued by NPM. But the problem with decentralization is that it normally, or ideally, would only result in more centralization in the public sector. Think of it this way. Let's say that the public sector is a company, and that company had many workers and managers under it. Decision-making power prior to the introduction of the NPM was vested equally between all the managers throughout the company. However, with the introduction of NPM, you would only have one or two managers that have power to make decisions. This ideally harms the public sector in many ways and yields contradictory results regarding the proponents of NPM, because now decisions would only be vested in the power of one or two managers, and that ideally undermines the public sector's values of being representative and democratic. Third, for example, NPM argues for performance measurement and management systems in the public sector as a tactic to increase the 3 E's of the public sector. Performance indicators and having employees of the public sector abide by strict systems can actually decrease the effectiveness, efficiency, and economy in the public sector. The problem here is twofold. One regards the method and other regards to human psychology. Regarding the method, performance indicators are designed by people themselves and therefore cannot measure all aspects of work. It is only designed to measure productivity, efficiency, and economy, but sometimes other values and other tangible indicators are the ones that actually matter, and they are the ones that need to be measured. This would, for instance, be something like employee motivation. Now, regarding the psychological dimension, having employees work under constant performance and evaluation to meet explicit targets can actually impede their performance due to the stress associated with constant demand and oversight. This was observed in the period where Taylor's scientific management was prominent. The performance indicators and strict evaluation to meet explicit targets essentially impedes the performance in the public sector because they narrow and ideally frame the employee's ability to think and act.